the Minister of Finance, Planning and Economic Development to come and chair this session. So you're most welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, round of applause.
Thank you very much, our moderator. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want to take the opportunity to welcome you to the 13th National Competitiveness Forum. Our IMC introduced me as Director Economic Affairs, but that is a different person. I am Anthony Chintumwanje. I am the coordinator for the Private Sector Development Program at the Ministry of Finance, and I'm sitting in for the Acting Director Economic Affairs. So I thought I should make that clarification so that it's very clear to everyone. So this session will go on up to 11, and as the MC has shared, we shall have, first of all, remarks, the welcoming remarks, and that will be coming from our own Diana Nanono. Thereafter, we will have the NPA represented here by Dr. Patrick Olowo, giving us the context and highlights for the national strategy for private sector development. We shall then have a keynote presentation from our PSST, and thereafter we will have the Minister of Finance launch the national strategy for private sector development. And then we will have a short session, about 20 minutes, question and answer, and then our commissioner, EDPR, will give us the next steps. So without wasting a lot of time, may I call upon the head private sector development unit, Madam Diana Nanono, to come and give the welcome remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chintu, for that introduction. Honorable members of Parliament present, Your Excellencies, the Deputy Secretary to the Treasury, the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Agriculture, development partners present, private sector players, the civil society representatives, the academia, the media present, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Diana Nanono, the head of the Private Sector Development Unit at the Ministry of Finance. I welcome you to this 13th National Competitiveness Forum and launch of the second National Strategy for Private Sector Development, organized by the Ministry of Finance in partnership with the National Planning Authority and other partners. The National Competitiveness Forum is one of the Ministry's public-private dialogue platforms for engaging with stakeholders on an annual basis, aimed at communicating the national economic development agenda and consequently feeding into the annual budget process. In this regard, the Ministry organizes the National Competitiveness Forum to engage and agree on interventions that enhance the country's private sector competitiveness. Currently, over 12 fora have been hosted, and these have guided policy and budgetary processes for private sector competitiveness. The forum has provided interventions with respect to easing the doing of business in this country, improving value chains, industrialization, and enterprise survival, growth, and performance. Ladies and gentlemen, several recommendations were made at the 12th forum, which were divided into two categories, namely the budget neutral recommendations, which were directed to ministries, departments, and agencies for implementation, and the budget non-neutral recommendations that were incorporated into the budget process. This year's forum is themed Leveraging Strategic Export Markets to boost investments for import substitution and export diversification opportunities. Discussions under this theme are relevant today given that Uganda operates in a the rising commodity prices, the geopolitical tensions occasioned by the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, among others. The impact of all these challenges to our economy has resulted into a number of economic management issues, including constrained fiscal space. This forum, therefore, is important in providing a platform to discuss and agree on the most appropriate interventions. Ladies and gentlemen, the forum today is special because it gives us a platform to witness the launch of the second national strategy for private sector development, which is a comprehensive framework for identifying and coordinating interventions for private sector competitiveness in Uganda. As we are all aware, the third National Development Plan provides a number of private sector interventions in all the 20 programs that need a coordinating framework to sustainably lower the cost of doing business, build internal capacities of local enterprises to compete for public procurements, strengthen the enabling environment and enforcement of standards, harmonize coordination of private sector associations and umbrella bodies to enhance export capacities. Ladies and gentlemen, it is therefore my singular honor to invite the representative of the National Planning Authority to present the context and highlights of the second national strategy for private sector development, and discussions after by a carefully selected panel of discussants ahead of its launch by the Honorable Minister of Finance. Thank you for honoring our invitation, and thank you for listening to me. I wish you fruitful deliberations today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Diana?
The Executive Director is unable to join us because of other pressing engagements. So before I make the presentation, I must say that this has been joint work. It has been consultative, led by the Minister of Finance, the National Planning Authority, Private Sector Foundation Uganda in partnership with MasterCard Foundation, other development partners, the private sector players, and all the other people in that space. So I need support. Good. So we are coming from the first strategy. We will hint about what we have achieved in the previous strategy and then what we are going to do in the second strategy. So just briefly, the private sector development is about actions from all of us, state and non-state actors, to try and develop the private sector, to make something out of the private sector in terms of boosting household incomes, in terms of generating profits, because private sector is profit driven. So our private sector, the way we know it, is that it contributes 77% of the formal jobs. It contributes 80% of the GDP. It funds 60% of the investments in this country. 2.5 million. Okay, thank you. 2.5 million people are employed within the private sector. The number needs still to go up. 80% of domestic revenues come from the private sector. So that tells us how important it is that we have to be deliberate as government, we have to be deliberate as society to develop this private sector. So we have an enabling policy and legal environment in which we are dealing with when we are formulating this. We know that right from the Constitution, the state under Article 9 on the right to development, it says that in order to facilitate rapid and equitable development, the state shall encourage private sector initiatives and self-reliance. Within the vision context, it talks of industrialization. Within the NDP, we are looking at boosting boosting household incomes, as we are going to see within our results chain. So everything, all the efforts that we are trying to do is intended at making sure that the household incomes go up. So looking at the first strategy briefly, it had 3 pillars aimed at boosting, the macro pillar which aimed at boosting investor confidence. Then the meso pillar was aimed at accelerating industrialization. And the micro pillar is aimed at looking at business development in terms of increasing profitability, which the next strategy is not diverging much from that. But it is all coined around competitiveness, boosting the competitiveness of the private sector. So what was some of the major achievements? These are just the few that are highlighted. We've had some increase in exports, although we had some reversals when COVID hit. We've had the digitalization of the land registry, because you know that under the aspects of doing business or the global competitiveness index, the operations of the land registry were one of the things that were being followed. So government has made sure that that land registry is digitalized. These are just some of the few. We've had a growth in the taxpayers registry. However, there are some others that the strategy has not performed well. So one of the areas in which the strategy has not performed well is that number 5. You might not attribute it directly to the strategy, but as government, we had thought that would eliminate all domestic areas. That has not been achieved. Still efforts are ongoing to do that. The construction of the oil pipeline, the discussions of the oil pipeline and the oil and gas sector have dragged. We've not addressed the transport infrastructure in rail. So these are some of the challenges These were some of the key deliverables of the strategy, but they have not been achieved. So when we look at, but what do we know about the private sector, the current status of the private sector? One, we have to say that this is not a homogeneous group. We do not have homogeneous players in there. We have the majority of them are small people. So collectively, we have 98% of the private sector as micro, small, and medium enterprises. That is a one. So the majority of the micro enterprises employ only one person. They employ only one person, and we have 6.5% employing between 5 to 9 people. So meaning that our enterprises are really small. We have enterprises that are not inequitably distributed in terms of regions. The statistics are showing that 58.9% are in the central. In central, that is Kampala alone has around 18.9%, and Karamoja region has less than 1%. Informality, there is a widespread informality in the private sector, so which this strategy tries to address. The large enterprises that are operating are mainly in agro-processing, they are in banking and finance, and light manufacturing. We can also add that despite the agriculture sector being the dominant, sector, there is evidence that there are some non-agricultural enterprises that each household has some non-agricultural enterprise. So at sub-regional level, over 40% of the households at sub-region, over 40% of households in Kampala, Karamoja have at least, and Karamoja and West Nile have at least one household member operating a household enterprise, while Acholi region has at least 12%. So household enterprises are critical in terms of enabling a household to generate some income. The next strategy tries to address the regional imbalance in terms of the spread of enterprises. So this is the usual story of having agriculture contribute, the sectoral contribution of agriculture declining, yet the majority are still in there, talking to the issues of lower productivity, which we ought to address. And the biggest output is coming from the service sector. Now, talk about a decline in total factor productivity in agriculture in the region. When you compare the ESC region, you're able to see there that Uganda has the least total factor productivity in agriculture, and it is on the decline. We have so many of our people involved in agricultural production, primary agriculture, but the productivity is declining. This speaks to our interventions at the subnational level, where we have to target households that are operating in that space of agriculture. Looking at the trends in investment, tax to GDP, lending rates, and the performance, what are we seeing here? We are looking at that green line, which represents private investments to GDP. We can see that they are higher than the public investments. We already made that point. But the problem that we are facing, we are having those high lending rates, although we are seeing a decline like from 2016-17, and we are seeing our tax to GDP still stagnant, just above around 10%, but with just some kind of slight decline. So these are some of the things that we need to balance if we are going to boost public investment as well as private investment. Talking about the issue of jobs, most of the jobs that are in the private sector are within the trade subsector. They are within transport, storage, and logistics. And what we are seeing, the bad news now, is that manufacturing was, there are some jobs that were lost to manufacturing, and some jobs were also lost in, education, possibly due to the effects of the 2 lockdowns that we had. This speaks to the nature of employment that was showing the informality that we have a number of people employed in informal jobs, and most of them are within the service sector. The next is on net exports, showing how we are still having a negative trade balance. This speaks to to the theme of this workshop. What do we do to make sure that we boost exports, or that we correct this negative trade balance that we are having, given the opportunities that are available? So having seen all this, the new strategy is trying now to position, the goal of the new strategy is to position the private sector to accelerate inclusive monetization of the economy. It is going to be difficult to boost household incomes when monetization levels are low, or when we have so many people that are outside the monetary economy. And in doing this, this strategy is trying to consolidate and coordinate all the key players within the private sector. So the policy pillars of this strategy are still built around the macro, those that are intended at boosting those that are intended to boosting the confidence of our investors. And then the meso, we are still in the drive of industrialization. And then the micro pillar is to do with business development, to do with productivity, increasing the productivity of the businesses and their profitability. Let's go to another slide to get to the theory of change. Now, in this strategy, we have already had from the head of private sector development unit that said that the NDP3 has around 20 programs, and it has interventions that are to do with private sector development. So in this strategy, we are trying to consolidate all the actions of the private sector actions within the NDP3 into one strategy, such that we're able to coordinate and consolidate the actions of the different players. So, looking at the theory of change. So, at the top, we are speaking to the NDP3 goal, because NDP3 is our business. So that is on increasing household incomes and the quality of life of Ugandans. So, but for the NDP, for the National Strategy for Private Sector Development, its goal is on positioning the private sector to accelerate inclusive monetization, and it has around 4 objectives. So the 4 objectives are: the first objective is aimed at sustaining efforts of reducing informality, because informality has given us some challenges, yet it also has opportunities for us. So we are trying to sustain all the efforts around to do strategic formalization of the businesses, such that we are able to gain some competitiveness. The second is we were hit by COVID, so our intention is to foster economic recovery and the restoration of the businesses that were hit by COVID. if you can recall, is that before COVID, we were growing at around 6%, and the private sector contributes a lot to this growth. We are yet to return to the pre-COVID growth trajectory because we are growing now in the region of 4%, and given the challenges that we are facing, it might even decrease. But with deliberate effort, we intend to restore all what has been lost, and we go back to our pre-COVID trajectory. And the third and most important in this is strengthening the area-based private sector along commodity and development value chains. So this brings us into the subnational level. Previously, we were from the midterm review of the NDP, or of the first strategy. There was a recommendation, or there was a finding, that the first strategy was urban-based, was Kampala-based. So this time round, we have gone down to the subnational, such that we bring all players at that level, now that government is going into the parish development model front. And last bit is on strengthening the coordination of all actors in the private sector development chain. I've already told you that this is around the macro, meso, and that kind of chain. Now, this is one of the most important aspects that I would like you to take note of. How we intend to get the results from the national result of the NDP, then the result of the second strategy that we are talking about, that is its goal. But in there, the intermediate outcomes that we are looking at, which intended at sustaining efforts for that enabling environment. So government has a lot to play in terms of putting in place an enabling environment, in terms of the right macro fiscal variables, in terms of the right policy incentives. So it is revolving around actions on improving the legal, regulatory, and administrative reforms that are ongoing. Some have been completed, some are yet to be completed. And the area-based, strengthening the area-based commodity development value chains, this speaks to our subnational or the parish development model mechanism, in which we are trying to do some kind of value chain development, bringing out specific commodities in each sub-region, as I'm going to indicate. And the next is on formalization and professionalization of the small and medium enterprises, which is critical. And the last bit is to do with coordination. There is a lot of resource wastage when we fail to coordinate all our efforts, development partners, government, and the private sector. And lastly, but not least, is actions or activities that are intended to boost climate-smart interventions, taking care of our environmental concerns. As I'm about to end, now the big screen comes. Now, this is very, very important for us in terms of our conceptualization of the subnational strategy. What are the challenges? So they are basically revolving around production, market access, and the weaknesses in the regional institutional capacities. So mitigating those risks, for example, at production, where we have a number of fake agricultural inputs, where we have weak regulation of vending in fake agricultural inputs, the implication of that is that we have low production and low productivity. And this has the biggest impact on people who are into primary production. So our mitigation or our intervention challenges around solving that. So if we solve this puzzle on production, market access, and the subnational institution capacity, then we will be able to support so many people at the subnational level. So this is just a highlight of the primary growth sectors of the enterprises that were identified in the study, or that the strategy has adopted to support the various regions that we have in subnational development. Next, please.
Doctor, you should be concluding.
2 slides and then I end it. First and foremost, this is a costed strategy. Only that we have costed it within, limiting it within the fiscal frame. What government can accommodate within its fiscal space. It is, one can say it is restricted, but there is room for other players to play within that, because it is not useful for us to do strategies which we cannot implement within the available fiscal space. The next, and we end it here. On the key messages, I want to end with the key messages. So the key takeaways are just 4. So while we can note that while the informal sector is critical, it is still a low-hanging fruit for us as a country, as a government, as players. So we have to strategically bring the informal sector within, it has to be strategically formalized for it to contribute to the development of this nation. And then the inequitable distribution of the private sector across regions needs to be looked in, and it has been looked in through this strategy. So we need to boost sub-regional investments and competitiveness. And then 3, businesses are not growing and expanding fast enough to create the much needed jobs, the tax revenues, among others, owing to a number of challenges, e.g. costly finance, poor entrepreneurial skills, and all that. So business development services and other initiatives are required to ensure that businesses contribute there, businesses can expand fast enough and grow the job. And one last bit, speaking to the theme of this, of today's theme, is that there is evidence of availability of market potential in regional markets, most especially the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, although we seem not to have, it seems we have not yet tapped a lot from that market. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Olo. I think we should give him another round of applause. Yeah, thank you very much. Doctor has taken us through a journey, first of all, describing and telling us what the current private sector is, its characteristics, and what this national strategy for private sector competitiveness is going to address. Thank you. Many of the things that you talked about are key. One of the rather shocking statistics is the fact that almost 99% of the private sector is MSMEs. I think one thing that I can note from this strategy is the fact that you have gone down to the subnational level, because that's where things happen. They don't happen here in Uganda, in urban centers. It is mainly in the subnational governments. Strengthening coordination, that is a key issue in private sector development. It needs to be addressed. The issue of fake agricultural inputs, I think, is a very big one. It needs to be addressed. I hope the strategy exhaustively has interventions that are going to address that. The issue of informality, that is another pain. And then businesses not being able to create employment, and quite a lot more. So I think if we implement this strategy the way it is meant to be implemented, if we can achieve or if we can address all these weaknesses, I think we shall be talking a different story after the end of the strategy. So as of now, I think we will have to go into our panel discussion. There will be an opportunity for you to come in and share your experiences and advice. But before we go into that, I want to go to the next, which is our panel discussions. And I want to take this opportunity to invite our panelists to come over here so that they can also share about their experience in private sector development. So I will start by calling upon Miss Anna Namboze, the country manager for Trademark East Africa. You're welcome. Please come and take your seat as one of our panelists today. And then I also invite Mr. Charles Lugendo, chairperson ICAU. Mr. Charles Lugendo, please come because you're one of our panelists today. Then I want also to call upon Mr. Stephen Asimwe, the Executive Director, Private Sector Foundation Uganda, as one of the panelists. Please come over so that we can hear from you. Then I also want to call upon Madame Blessing Owomgisha Immaculate, the Secretary General of Uganda National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. You're welcome, Immaculate. I want to call upon Mr. James Karama, who is Head Client Coverage, Stanbic Bank. Please come and join us. And finally, I want to call upon Mr. Emmanuel Mutahungwa from the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Cooperatives to come over. Commissioner Emmanuel, please welcome. So I want to welcome our panelists. You can be my neighbor here. I want to welcome you all, our panelists, and I'll straight away start with you. I'll just give you 2 minutes to talk about your feel about this national private sector competitiveness strategy. I'll start with Anna. Just a few minutes, not more than 2.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. As I was introduced, my name is Anna Namboze and I work with Trademark East Africa. Thank you for presenting the strategy to us this morning. I'm happy to see that the strategy this time is more outward looking. I think the first strategy was inward looking, try and build the competitiveness of the local farms. But now we are outward looking. We're trying to see how we can export the produce that we have, the local produce. So in that regard, again, I am happy to see that we are focusing on some of the key elements that will help Uganda to be able to export. I know we've looked at the regulatory environment. We've looked at how to improve government to business services through the business licensing reforms and so on. But I'd like to see among the laws more focus on some of these facilitation agendas, like the special economic zones. That should be a key focus for us because it will enable more entities to fall within the ambit of, to be facilitated by government. Right now we are either a free zone authority or an industrial park, but we need the special economic zones. We also need to see more government business trustworthy agendas. For instance, we have the authorized economic operator system that is with the URA. URA has about 118 companies there. These companies contribute about 35% of our revenue collection. So if we can have, and basically it is a way of facilitating these companies to go faster, to exit faster, to export beyond Uganda faster.
Okay.
And it's a trust, because I said these companies have proved to URA that their books are in order, that what they declare is actually what they are exporting, so they don't need to go through the nitty-gritty each time they export. So this would be interesting to see. Again, looking at exports, when you talk about exports, this strategy is more deliberate, and I like that, because if you are exporting, we have to have a target and say we are producing for export. We cannot just say what we are not consuming locally is what we are going to export. In that regard, that's why we have UNBS presentations later, issues of SPS coming, because you're not going to transport your matoke or whatever it is you're going to export the same way we do locally. I mean, even locally shouldn't be accepted, because once you take in this produce out, they're going to look if the matoke is all green, or if it has any scratch, it's going to be rejected. If you've transported your goods in a certain way, they're going to get damaged, which the export market does not allow. So, and this is just a small snippet of it. The phytosanitary matters are huge, and these are one of the focuses we are looking at. The issue of value chains that was mentioned here, again, is one of those that is very key, because we need to be able to, again, on issues of phyto and phytosanitary services, we need to look right from the inputs. You have to look at the entire value chain, and it's good to have a lead farm, not just so that you can have your produce, a market for your produce, but also so that these lead farms can be able sometimes to guide their producers on maybe where to get the right seed, where to get the right chemicals, and so on and so forth.
Okay.
Okay, just looking at that. Okay, we'll
I
continue
gave you
later.
only 2 minutes. So can we hear from Charles? Charles Lugendo, what's your feel of this new strategy?
Thank you very much. The strategy is good, but it is generalized. I will first talk about, the strategy talks about taking advantage of the export markets. But at the same time, the northern corridor is the heartbeat of exports. The government has gone ahead to improve on the infrastructure. Right now we have the Kampala flyers, but they can't work in isolation. I'm looking at this strategy where the government can unclog the corridor from Mukono to Mpigi. It is very, very urgent. I come from a background of global logistics. It takes a truck 48 hours to move from Mombasa to Malaba. It also takes a truck 48 hours to move from Mukono to Mpigi and back to Mukono. So as a matter of urgency, the northern corridor must be decongested, must be unclogged, the cargo must flow. We've talked about the markets, taking advantage of opportunities and markets. When we got the Ukraine-Russian war, everybody looked at it with a lot of pessimism. On the other hand, it should have been an opportunity for us as a country with good soils that produce some of the best oil seeds in the continent, to double or triple our output of seed oil in a period of 4 months, instead of praying and waiting for the war to end. Another issue is the finances. All these activities require finances, especially in the private sector. And this money comes from banks. Unfortunately, the banks of today, sorry to say this, they are not so much into mobilizing deposits locally. They mobilize deposits internationally, and then lend out this money for profit. What if the government liberalized the pension scheme and put, instead of government giving out pensions going forward, they put this money into a national social security fund or some providence body? The government has a wage bill of about 5 trillion a year. That means they can put 500 billion in these banks, and this money can capitalize the banks, can capitalize the activities that require borrowing.
Okay. Thank you very much, Charles. Charles, you hinted on banks in Uganda, and I thought I should straight away go to James Karama. James, what do you think?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. First, this topic is very timely, especially the bit about leveraging strategic export markets to boost investments for import substitution. As you all are aware, to be able to export, you need to first develop local capacity. So this theme kind of puts two responsibilities on the country: develop local capacity, meet your local needs, and also be able to export. And this theme is very timely, especially after COVID, and when we realize that you can easily get disrupted and your reliance on external markets or reliance on imports gets disrupted, so you need some level of local capacity. Even the geopolitical tensions have even made it worse because we don't know where the next war is coming from. This means that in a large way, Ugandans should look to themselves. And as Stanbic, we pride ourselves in the motto or mantra that we call Uganda home and we drive her growth. However, there is no silver bullet. And so we support the multi-sectoral approach that you're driving here. Bring everybody together and let's see how best to progress our development. Now, to drive value addition, in many ways, banks are part of the story. Banks support the risk management for these enterprises. And the first point of risk management is the enterprise development. Are these enterprises well organized? Do they understand quality? Do they understand standards? Are they technical enough to access financing, manage the financing, and pay it back? And employ people and pay these people's salaries, pay insurance, pay their medical health requirements, and give them a future and career. And that's where we come in. We've put in some interventions as a bank. One of our biggest is the incubator. The Stanbic incubator is involved in training for enterprises, and it's free. You come in, we train you across the whole spectrum of training that you need, from financial management, legal structuring, procurement, even marketing, and how do you access markets. But one area, since I have only 2 minutes from the chair, that I would like us to highlight is the opportunity digitization has brought to countries, to us, and how we harness the fourth industrial revolution. Like, for example, we have a Stanbic platform that we call the Stanbic Trade Club, where the moment you become a member, you have access to importers and exporters in over 190 locations, 190 countries of people who want to buy things from you. Over 200 pages of information. And once you join the platform, it gives you options. And that's an example of how we can leverage digital platforms to connect local businesses to international business. Even there are risks around liquidity management. When I sell, do I get paid on time? What's the process of payment? We have an example of what we call the East Africa Borderless Payment Platform, Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. In just 1 year, since we launched it in January 2021, $40 million worth of transactions have gone through this platform. And it's an example of how we can use digital platforms to drive the export opportunities in the country. So I'll stop at that, moderator.
Thank you very much, James. I think that is again, we have some good news there. The incubation, I think you should make sure that people get to know your contacts, because many want to go through the platform, the opportunities therein. Yes. I think it's a very good initiative, Stanbic. So make sure that, I hope you have carried enough cards. And
yes, I have carried.
because members will definitely want to see how to access that.
I have carried cards with me.
I will now go to Mr. Emmanuel Mutahunga from the Ministry of Trade. Emmanuel, from the statistics, we've been told that 98.8% of the private sector is made up of MSMEs. It's only 1% which are large private sector. So the majority, or all of them, I think most of the private from this is MSMEs, and SMEs, they are faced with quite a number of challenges. There are issues of informality, there are issues of mortality. Many do not see their first, second, and third birthday. There are issues of the high cost of doing business. And coming from the Ministry of Trade, maybe you need to share with us, what is trade really doing to make sure that many of these MSMEs actually turn into large private sector organizations, and that we reduce this percentage?
Yeah, thank you very much, and good morning, friends. I wouldn't worry so much about the largest concentration or classification of enterprises being MSMEs, because from the little science that I have read, even human bodies are made up of small things called cells and something like that. So those small parts actually ultimately make up the whole. And you know what affects the whole goes back and affects the small units. So somehow, if I want to speak now to the context of this theme, the challenges that the SMEs face are essentially also the same challenges that even the big enterprises face. Now, what we may want to do is to look at how do we then tailor them to the biggest concentration of enterprises that we have, the SMEs. Now, I want to come back to speak to the theme, leveraging strategic markets for export promotion and import substitution, so that I answer your question in context of what we are discussing today. I would want first start by asking, what are these strategic markets? Do we have a commonly agreed position on what they are? And coming from where I come from, this is what I would be looking at. I would be looking at the preferential markets. That is those markets that have removed or reduced taxes on our exports when we get there. In short, our products have been made more competitive when we export there, because the taxes are already lower. Number two, there are those markets which are closer to us geographically, the likes of Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi, and so on. Now, what are the constraints that our companies face in moving to export there? And allow me to move systematically before I get to answer your question, so that I don't start at the end without going through the proper diagnosis. Now, what constraints do our companies face when we are moving to exporting there? The first one, financing, cost, and availability. That really is a big issue. When you look at the statistics, we find I think in the presentation over there, we saw the graph. There is some bit of financing, but the cost is really still high. And that cuts across, irrespective of the sizes. Of course, the bigger one, the risk profile may be lower, and therefore the interest rate is a little lower. But if you compare with the people you are competing with in export markets, you are still not doing the way we should be. So financing is an issue on the cost element. Then we have also a very fundamental issue on the quality assurance. And quality assurance, I'm looking at standards, I'm looking at sanitary and phytosanitary measures for agricultural products, the fresh products. That remains a constraint for them. Then regulatory complementarity. And when I talk about regulatory complementarity, what am I looking at? Are our regulations as government supportive of private sector competitiveness to export and also substitute imports? If we will look at the World Bank doing business reports, much as it has been discontinued, you look at how long does it take for one to establish a factory, for example, construction. How long does it take to get a construction permit? Because if I want to set up a factory for import substitution, I must deal with the local government. They are the ones who are going to be the regulators in that area for construction, and so on and so forth. So I'm looking at regulatory complementarity, and this will still cut across the board. Then physical connectivity, or interconnectivity for that matter, because we are looking at export markets. And when I talk about physical interconnectivity, I'm not looking at just the roads in Uganda or the rail in Uganda, but in export markets, because here we are speaking export markets. If I have a good road that takes me up the border with the DRC, and after that it is messy, then I cannot be able to export. And that will apply irrespective of the size of the enterprise. There is a very interesting article I've read in The Economist. It's an old article called Tracking in Cameroon. The road here is unpaved. So you can imagine you are going to here, but the road is still unpaved. Now here we are. What does this drive me to? You have already a poor state of infrastructure within the region for us to leverage on exports. But you also have some bits of skirmishes of insecurity in these markets. This week, you must have read on social media, but also mainstream media, about rebels in one of the neighboring countries stopping free flow of cargo from Uganda and Kenya. This certainly affects the small enterprises, the big enterprises, and then what then do we need to be looking at? Can we de-risk these markets? And we've had these discussions as a government, not just as Minister of Trade. How do we de-risk these markets so that the private enterprises can able to get into these markets without worrying so much about the potential loss of their exports into these markets? Then there is a very interesting thing that I would want to bring out. Leveraging on synergies across government, but also between government and the private sector. What am I looking at? We have open markets, say in East African community, in COMESA. Then you look at the statistics of how much are you selling there. Very limited figures. My brother here who sells to Europe, he'll tell you the market is so big, but I'm just scratching a little bit of it. Why? I can't have all the quantities that they require. And you're not talking about quality yet. Now, if we have government interventions that we have put in place now, like the parish development model, how do we use this strategy to link them to the market so that you are actually doing market-tailored production? And all these are discussions that we are having as a government and as government with the private sector. And I would want to end with one bit. What we have done on the export markets largely has been regulatory integration, if I use that phrase, where we go meet with the Kenya or under the African Continental Free Trade Area and agree that our regulations are going to be harmonized in this manner. But when it comes, particularly the African continent, on the physical integration, I think we are still lying far back. If you did a research, or at least just a simple search, you want to ship a container of products from here to Algeria or to Niger, vis-a-vis shipping it to China or Europe, you can see the level of disjointedness within moving within Africa. We are doing now a national CFT implementation strategy, and when you look at the indices of interconnectivity in Africa, you really find that there are big gaps, which now this strategy that we have as government of Uganda on private sector development would need probably to build on to see how do we then work with other partners outside Uganda so that our exports can get into this market. Because I think this is fundamentally important. Otherwise, if you build competitiveness around here, but some key fundamentals responsible for private sector competitiveness to drive exports and therefore import substitute are not available within your partners, you remain a good bride without maids. And that probably doesn't happen very often. Let me stop here for now.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. I hope many of the things that you have talked about, the issues of financing, cost being high, quality assurance, regulatory complementarity, are covered in one way or the other in the various strategies that we have as a country. Okay, I will now go to Mr. Asimwe. Mr. Asimwe, I think as you share your views on the strategy, maybe one of the things that you should talk about is that this strategy is coming at a time when the economy is healing from the global economic challenges. What would a strategy of this nature prioritize to ensure economic growth?
Thank you, Mr. Mwanje, for that question. Good morning, everybody. I think colleagues have pretty much delved into some of the issues, but just quickly to put some emphasis on the fact that I think the strategy should also be diagnostic in the context of saying where are our biggest challenges and therefore what sort of interventions do we put in place. Now, of course, many things have been highlighted here. One of the biggest challenges that we have and still dog our economy is the cost of doing business. That has been emphasized. Cost of money, the cost of interventions. So just to build on what Emmanuel said, at the PSFU, in the last 9 months, we have concentrated very much on creating markets, especially the regional markets. So DRC, we were in Kinshasa and Goma, South Sudan, Tanzania, Burundi. We engaged with Somalia. Very good markets, very, very good markets. But like Emmanuel said, some of the challenges are somewhere in the middle, facilitative. So for instance, accessing credit for export has been a big challenge. So what did we do at PSFU? The Uganda Bankers Association is our member. And so we engaged them and said, look, how do we critically come in halfway? We have an export facility, we have the infrastructure, the markets are waiting for us. What do we do? And very, very quickly, between ourselves, we were able to get an export credit facility of 12% per annum and 0.5% on the dollar rate. And so this intervention was very, very quick, and it has been able to help. But I'll give an example of an export opportunity in horticulture, and I'm seated opposite Mr. Huda. There are those little springboard interventions that we badly need. For instance, is there, and this should really come in this strategy as we go deeper, to look at it. How do we connect the farm, the infrastructure, the airport, and be able to beat a deadline for an export of vegetables in Tesco's in London? There are those little things, extension farming capacities, cold storage facilities, a removal of a lot of those little barriers at the airport to access cold rooms so that a cargo plane can easily pick a consignment of vegetables and be able to do a quick 8-hour flight into London to beat a deadline. The demons are in those little processes. That policeman who stops a truck that is carrying a consignment of vegetables destined for London needs to be appraised of the impact of stopping that truck for 2 hours. Because those 2 hours can substantially change the chemical component of the vegetables that are headed there. And everybody loses. The taxman loses, the transporter loses, the farmer loses, and then there is the reputational issue of the country that These Ugandans never arrive on time. Their things are late. The quality is not good. So we need to, this document is fantastic. And by the way, I wish to commend the team. We worked with them, PSFU was very much, but the competitiveness is in the detail. So we need to trace backwards those elements that reinforce, that catalyze, that support elements of competitiveness when we are looking at export. So cost of money, cost of borrowing, infrastructure, very, very critical. My previous station was tourism. 75% of our tourism earnings, especially on conservation, are from 2 national parks, Ugahinga and Bwindi. The road from Kanungu to some of those 10 or 15 gates are in a terrible mess. We badly need to move quickly. A gorilla permit is $750. But accessing that gorilla when you land in Entebbe makes it less competitive for someone to fly and drive 12 hours and be able to see that gorilla and pay you $750. In our neighborhood, it takes them almost 2 hours from the airport in Kanombe to access those. So we need to have a much more synthesized discussion of this. And at private sector foundation, which includes 310 business associations, we have the answers. Thankfully, the Ministry of Finance has started cooperating. We now have weekly meetings. But it should be more in the context of shared services. So trade, Ministry of Transport, all of us should come into a room and be able to translate this document so that when we come to the third NSPD, we have quick answers. But very quickly, because of time, the issue of even us at private sector, we still have governance issues. At PSFU, we are trying to create a special purpose vehicle to ensure that our association members understand that this competitiveness thing is us. We need to put our house in order on issues of standards, of quality, of reliability, of sustainability, so that we ensure. I mean, we go to these markets and the guy is asking you for 10 tons per week. And we're saying, oh, we have a lot of coffee. First 10 consignments, super. The next 8, 5, 4, 3, 2, no reliable, they just cancel our system. So there are those issues that we need to work on internally. The other issue, Mr. Chairman, is the issue of air transport. I think, Mr. PSST, the issue of Uganda air cargo needs to be looked at quickly. When we went to DRC, we found a fantastic market. 18 million people live in one city called Kinshasa. The cost of beef, 1 kilogram, is almost 80 to 100,000 Uganda shillings. The cost of flying a kilogram from here to Kinshasa is anywhere between $8 and $10 because of having to, shared services with different cargo. Can we start to narrow down some of those very, very simple interventions that need government or a PPP arrangement where we can have those shared values that can then answer what the chairman is saying. The other one is the need for us to critically start to rethink some of the issues on capital markets. There are very good opportunities raising capital. At PSFU, we are looking at a catalytic fund that can be able to have cheap, fast, affordable, and quickly facilitative credit that can support. But I want to conclude on 2 things which have not appeared in this. Uganda is fast approaching 50 million people. We have a constituency of people we have not considered seriously. That is in the innovation, the arts and culture area. I was just doing some statistics on my chair there. Nigeria has emerged as the 2nd largest music industry in the world, after the US and maybe India. It is the 2nd largest after Bollywood. The earnings by this morning were $73 million. There's a group of young people who are innovative. You need to go to places like Innovation Village, Mr. PSST. There's a group of young people who have hit the fashion scene with their own resources. We need to start looking at innovation. My brother mentioned technology. the need for us to look at the creative arts as another emerging sector. And I think traditionally we have concentrated on manufacturing, agriculture, etc. But let's think outside the box and think no box. There are some very, very good innovation areas. And at PSFU, we're looking at intervening directly in the creative arts, bringing the lawyers in that space on things like the startup policy needs to be looked at more critically. But as I conclude, the need to start looking at the element of local content, especially in the construction industry. Those are areas that are very critical, and I think that they could be given more space in this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simwe. One of the key issues that comes out of your discussion is the fact that competitiveness is within the detail. I think that is a very important observation. And also the observation that the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Trade, and all other ministries working together. The good thing is that this national, for the private sector, it is actually one of its intentions is to have a platform for coordination of private sector initiatives. So I think it should be able to address them. And many of the things that are missing, I hope the detail in the strategy has what you're talking about. If it doesn't have, I think this is something that we need to note and make sure that the strategy includes all the issues that seem to be left out. I'll now go to Madam Blessing Owomgisha. Blessing is from Uganda National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. They have quite a number of members, over 40,000, and she's the Secretary General. I think, Blessing, what I will maybe request you to talk about as you share about this strategy is what are your expectations of this strategy and what would you want to achieve by the end of the strategy, talking from a chamber point of view.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chintu. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, we are very excited about this strategy. It addresses quite a number of things that had been left out in the initial strategy. So it's a plus for us as the private sector to know that some of the areas that had been left out have actually been captured from this strategy. One of the most exciting things when we looked at the strategy is the fact that we are trying to leverage on the export markets that are available. This is very timely because all over the continent, we are talking about African Continental Free Trade Area and how much exposure we have and the available market that is the largest in the world. And this strategy will actually help us to prepare our private sector to be able to penetrate these markets. I was looking at the statistics that were initially shared, where it was indicated that 98.8 form part of the macro, small and medium enterprises. And I wanted to compare them with the informal sector that we're talking about. You know, every time we talk about the informal sector, most of the people think that formalization is when we get to a registration process. We don't get to know that formalization could get into acquisition of the licenses that we need, the permits that we need. You don't get into the details. So most of the statistics stop on how many companies have been legally registered. But when you go past that, this number will actually reduce very many people into the informal sector. So when we're talking about exportation, I think there is an intentional need for us to focus on what we need past the registration of companies, what we need for us to be able to penetrate these markets, and what is the cost that is implicated on us acquiring those. And I was very excited when I looked at the phase that provides for regulatory and administrative procedures. I hope that in detail we'll be able to understand that we are finding solutions in the cost of one, the administrative costs that we incur. For example, if you are saying that we are talking about standards, what is the cost of actually getting a Q mark? how are we competitive with our neighbors? Because if our cost is 500,000 or 1 million and our neighbors are at 250, the competitiveness might not come as well. So we move from even getting these normal permits for operating businesses. We go to the cross-border. When you look at the cross-border trade, what do we need? What is the procedure? How long does it take for us to get to the cross-border? So informalization should not just be focusing on registration of companies. It should go deep to whatever requirements that we need for us to be able to carry out businesses across the border. But it is very exciting because this strategy is actually focusing on formalization, which means that the tax base that has been imposed on most of the companies that are already in the formal sector will reduce, because then we are encouraging as many people as possible to get on course. But also the competitiveness will also increase, because at the end of the day, no company or no informal sector player will be able to transact across the border if they have not yet formalized. The other thing that I wanted to talk about that actually shows that this is a green light for us is the intentional value chain development. Most of the times when we are looking at the final product and we say it does not meet the quality that is required on the market, we have not gone through that value chain that that product has gone through or that service has gone through. So this strategy specifically goes from production to access to markets to capacity building of the individual players. Let me just give an example of agriculture. We are not just looking at the final purchasers of the agricultural produce. We are saying we're doing business to business, farm-led, so that people need to know the quality that moves from the initial preparation of the soils to, post-harvest handling, to the greenhouses that we need for storage, to the trainings that they need. So I think this by far is very impactful, and it might be substantially effective if it is implemented. The other thing that I wanted to comment about is the harmonization of the private sector coordination. And this is something that has really been lagging behind, because the private sector is largely segmented. There's this one representing this, then there's this, then there are different policies that need to be harmonized, but you do not find a way of bringing them together. So the joint public and private dialogue that has been suggested could be one of the ways for us to find solutions, get to the real situation of the private sector and find their solutions. Most of the research that is carried out is carried out on assumptions that maybe the private sector is having this challenge and this challenge, because there's no harmonized way of getting the challenges that the private sector actually have for them to be pushed forward. But with this suggestion of the harmonized private and public sector dialogue and a neutralized platform where people can meet, the private sector can meet and the public sector can meet, could be one of the solutions that we actually need. Lastly, I want to also highlight that one of the things that had been left out in the last strategy was the fact that there was no strategy implementing committee for monitoring. And this is something that has come up here. When there's a strategy, there has to be, I don't want to call it policing, I don't know the right word to use, but there has to be a strategy of monitoring whether it is working or it is not working. I know that it has been highlighted in the summary that has been presented by NPA, but we would want to know the composition. Because if the implementers are the same people that are monitoring it, are the same people that are implementing it, becomes difficult for you to monitor your own strategy and also be able to rectify and say, no, you're going the right way, you're going the wrong way, I think you could have done better in this line. So we would want to know what is the criteria for this committee that will be monitoring. How are they tracking the changes? Do they have maybe quarterly meetings where they will meet and be able to assess and evaluate that maybe this procedure that we're taking is working or this procedure is not working? But I would like to also highlight the fact that we have gone subnational, and this is a very good thing, because most of the strategies are focusing in urban areas. Like the first one was focusing in urban areas. It was leaving out most of the other regions. Now, Chamber of Commerce is an association that is on a district and regional level. So for us, we feel that this strategy would actually help the private sector on constituencies that we actually represent. So when we go to the sub-national level, then there it helps us with the chain, the value chain development that has been enhanced in this strategy. So we want to commend the team that has put this together. We are going to also be able to review the detail, like my colleague from PSFU has rightly put, that the devil is always in the detail, on the implementation, on what we need to do, on who does what, on the roles that are played by the public and the private sector for us to be able to grow together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Blessing. The issue of monitoring the strategy implementation, the issue of coordination, I think is very, very important for us to make sure that the strategy gives us the results that we anticipate. Now, I still have quite a number of areas where I want the panelists to clarify, but I want to request the PSST to come and give, is going to take us through leveraging strategic export markets to boost investments for import substitution and export diversification opportunities. PST, please.
I shall request the team on the systems to walk with me through the slides. It's okay, you can, I'll be prompting you, because if I do that, it will take a lot of time in back and forth. Thank you very much, Chairperson, for this session, for allowing me the time to come and make this Secretary Treasury in the keynote address shall be able to be part and parcel of the discussions and also the kind of recommendations that are going to emerge from here. I bring the apologies of the Permanent Secretary Treasury, who, although he was going to come here, has been summoned for another equally important presentation. I therefore have the honor on his behalf to make this submission, and I promise I'll take only 20 minutes of your time in under 20 slides to communicate. And I think what's most important is that we need to communicate in this strategy, and I hope I'll be able to achieve that in delivering this keynote address on his behalf. The outline, as you can see from there, is going to deal with introduction, to put in context what this strategy contains and how the topic I'm going to present is very relevant for us to understand and anchor the purpose of the strategy in this presentation. The topic is leveraging strategic export market to boost substitution and export development. The next thing I look at is the export performance briefly, for you to appreciate what has it been in the past and what is it now that we need to take attention to in order to design what's appropriate for us to leverage on that. Number 3, I'm going to look at the issues affecting the export performance briefly, before looking at the public sector investments, which we are going to put in place, or putting in place, in order to entice the private sector to equally come and participate with us in this area. And we shall look at the new approaches to export development before looking at the key lessons from best practices elsewhere and the proposed policy actions for us to consider. The next slide talks about the need for us to understand what is competitiveness really before we even delve or dive into it. At a macro level, competitiveness is the ability of an economy to supply increasing aggregate demand and maintain the exports in a continuous manner. Ability for us to increase aggregate demand, ability for the population and the economy to be able to have a bigger purchasing power of the people in that economy and be able to compete successfully with commercial rivals. the private sector foundation made a very good comparison with respect to the price of beef out there in Congo. What are other competitors who are selling to that market? For the producers here, how do you compare the price ex-farm of that output of beef with the price ex-farm for somebody else who's exporting that market and be able to maintain competitiveness and a critical niche of that market? I think I noticed also private sector foundation sponsored this issue, but I don't see their logo here. But that is for the team to be able to put it up. If somebody can design it quickly before I finish, I'll have achieved one purpose of recognizing them in a better way. From a welfare point of perspective, the competitiveness ability of a country or location to create welfare from that social welfare point of view in our villages, in our communities, in our cities. How do we create welfare sustainably? That is a measure of competitiveness. In terms of exports, certainly, it refers to an economy. It refers to an economy which is competitive if it can export more than it can import. That's a very good definition of competitiveness of the economy. So I'm anchoring this definition so that we understand exactly what are we talking about when I'm dealing with this topic. Can our economy export more than we are importing? I'll later on, towards the end, be able to show you what the situation is now. How can we measure competitiveness? I think that's another thing that I want us to share so that as we move on, we know that let's not talk about competitiveness in abstract. Let's be able to measure, and I'm happy that people are concerned about the coordination mechanism for us to see how good this policy is moving. The second development, private sector development strategy. How are we moving from one year to the other? We should be able to measure it. There are about 4 parameters that I want us to walk through gently. The relative export prices, which the ratio, which measures the country's export. The second measure that we need to look at in measuring competitiveness is the terms of trade, which is an index of the ratio of a country's exports and import prices. Some of it is seen in the exchange rate movements. If you see a shilling depreciating, then you know that it seems your currency is weakening against the other currencies on account of the quantum of what you're exporting relative to the other. And the reverse is also true. So that should be the other measure that we must watch out in our monitoring and our coordination arrangements in terms of measuring how far we're improving in terms of competitiveness. The fourth ratio is our labor productivity. I think some of you have talked about the kind of labor that we have to produce our outputs for export. How much are we paying for that labor to produce? I think we're relatively competitive in terms of the numbers of people who are producing at the various enterprises, formal or informal, and how do you intend to organize those people in that labor market to be able to acquire the skill that's necessary? And somebody talked about innovation, how to tap into the innovation of those skills in order to produce that output and then be able to sell that product outside. The quantum of that labor price in the final product that you have out there is very important in your competitiveness measurement so that we move together in that direction. Finally, the fourth indicator that we need to watch out in our monitoring of our performance is the unit labor costs, which are certainly the cost of labor per unit of output. Of that kilogram of beef that you're producing, how much does labor cost? Could it have been that the bigger part of it is by machinery, which you're importing? Could it be that you don't have skilled labor to deal with aspects of that export that are necessary for you to certify the value in line with the phytosanitary standards, etc., etc., for that export commodity? The unit cost of labor per the unit cost of output that you're exporting. Let's now shift, having understood what competitiveness is, the measurement of competitiveness. Let's look at the exports and our national ambition. Government of Uganda through the NDP3 certainly set out very ambitious aspects and targets to pursue an export-oriented growth strategy in identifying export promotion as a key development strategy along with the industrialization program. We have also set out to increase the value of manufactured exports. The value of those manufactured exports. What are we manufacturing? Not primary commodities. In total exports from 12.3%, the data is there, to 20%. That's what we've set out to do. That tells you the kind of direction we want the private sector, together with the government, to move into in terms of measuring what is it that we're exporting in the first instance. Primary products, everybody can export. But if we add value to that product and export it, and that proportion of those exports is then the one that tells us the amount of value of manufactured products, processed to the final products, you are going to the high-end output in order to compete in those markets. Using the other ratios that we talked about. The third area is we want to increase the ratio of exports to GDP. And this ratio is a liquidity ratio, which is very important, even in terms of showing us the direction of our capacity to finance the loans that we are getting from abroad. So we want this ratio to grow from 12.7% to 20% in this planning period of the NDP. It shows you that the capacity of the economy to generate that wealth, that welfare, is enough for that economy to be able to pay its debt, to be able to have good reserves in case of the difficulties that at times come, like the recent one we've had for 2 years, and so on and so forth. So we are setting a very ambitious target, and how we are going to achieve that is part and parcel of what this strategy should and is addressing, and we shall be able to measure it year in, year out, so that we stop now from the Book of Lamentations to the Book of Acts. Now let's go to the next slide, which gives us the priorities and export growth areas that we have set ourselves to do, again, in the context of NDP3, to anchor the competitiveness agenda in this economy. We have set out to strengthen the legal and institutional arrangements to support manufacturing for exports and export development. I'll tell you briefly towards the end of this presentation what these are in real terms, not in terms of the literature review. 2, we're establishing export credit guarantee schemes for the SMEs, and I think some of the panelists mentioned it, and these need to be enhanced in terms of putting them together, helping them to expand these obstacles that most of the panelists mentioned, in order to deal decisively with those areas that constrain the expansion of the necessary inputs into that area. Number 3, we are certainly continuing with public sector investments to boost import substitution for value-added exports. And in this area, there are quite a number of activities that we are talking about. From the production side, we are certainly paying attention now to the whole of government being in a parish. That wonderful program called the Parish Development Plan is intended to address, is a public sector investment to address the supply side constraints with respect to what is required for us to export sustainably, add value sustainably, and be able to export manufactured items sustainably. We are talking about irrigation, solar powered irrigation schemes to mitigate the supply side constraints as a result of climate change and at times drought, which hits us. We have just come out from that kind of cycle. We have also paid attention to organizing the large informal villages. The 79% of the people are being organized, and I think I wanted the gentleman from cooperatives to have mentioned it. Informality is not something that's very good for us to continuously produce. We need to start with the basics of organizing society to produce and participate in production and sustainably for their own benefit in terms of welfare.
What are we doing? The circle in every parish, for them to identify a production line which they know, and they obtain inputs from what you used to supply from the center. They now become their procurement managers in order to put exactly what they want in a parish to produce what exactly they are capable of producing, guided by our Ministry of Agriculture and Extension workers on quantities and seeds and materials that are supplied by research institutions. And what is it that we're importing now? I think one of the slides there shows what we're importing, which we could produce from here in these organized societies. I mean, circles and other items through the PDM. If the PDM goes on for the next 5 years, which is the intention of government, you'll have about 5 trillion shillings at the parish level. And 5 trillion is about 500 million or beyond at the parish level. To do what? One, to allow those parishes produce what they have chosen to produce, which is very good for them, to allow them to concentrate that production to improve their welfare. Remember I talked about welfare at the beginning? Sustainably. To do what they can do with respect to marketing the items, to link that output with the next level of production. Because of taking electricity to the rural growth centers, that electricity then is used to power industries. Some of that money will be used for them to build storage facilities. Agriculture and trade and everybody else will then play in the space of quality assurance and post-harvest, minimizing post-harvest losses. The whole of government operating a parish is the point I'm emphasizing about public sector investments in international market sustainably. 4, developing financial and logistical systems to increase access to regional and international markets. I've mentioned quite a number of those initiatives, and we have supported quite a number of institutions in that area. 5, developing the requisite infrastructure to support manufacturing along Uganda's planned growth corridors. East, south, west, north, and so on, that triangle, that growth triangle. Along that growth triangle is supply of the necessary facilities for then people at the regional level to deal with the requisite manufacturing, and the world is unprecedented. We are coming out of a situation where the whole world economies, not only Uganda, forget about the financial crisis, it was sports of the world, but the whole world was locked down for 2 years. I think in our age, all of us who are here, we have never seen such a situation. Therefore, I'm saying this for purpose of emphasis. We are dealing with a very difficult situation. Even those of you who are judging us harshly about lack of incentives for some areas and the rest of it, should bear in mind, in no circumstance has Uganda been in this kind of situation before. Even since independence, we have never seen this kind of economic challenge. And to come out of it, certainly, I think we have started dealing with, we chose the path of dealing decisively with this by refusing subsidies, refusing tax cuts, refusing all those things. And you can see the consequences elsewhere, even developed world, where such attempts were made, and the consequences were very rapid, and you can see what's happening in some of them. But Uganda, I think we need to thank the planners for those decisions that they advised on. So the growth of the GDP is slow, but it's growing. That's one good thing. As one of the presidents in the Far East said, he challenged his scientists to manufacture a tractor. That's a very famous story that we normally hear. So the scientists went and manufactured a tractor, but the tractor, instead of going forward, was moving backward. So the time of judgment came, measuring the performance. They were called to this leader, who is very tough, said, "What have you done, my scientists?" The scientist said, trembling because the next thing would be maybe a firing squad. "Sir, Your Excellency, we manufactured a tractor, but instead of going forward, the tractor is moving behind." the president clapped. Very good. At least now go back and work and make it sure it's going forward. That's the kind of thing that will happen, what is happening to our economy. It's growing but slowly. Now, challenge us now, instead of growing slowly in the right direction, sharpen the focus through this strategy in order to make the economy now grow exponentially. Let me look at the structure of the exports. Certainly, you see from that diagram that Uganda has seen a troubling pattern of export growth, with the largest contribution of export growth coming from moderate and low complexity products, particularly precious metals, unprocessed mainly, and stones, then coffee, tea, spices, and of course our posho and beans, which are going to the sub-region. Low complexity of the products is a measure that shows you that you are going to get low revenue anyway. It's not a surprise. And are you therefore surprised that you are earning less from your exports? Certainly not. Then what must we do? Let's now aim at the other measure, the measure of manufactured items to your exports. We should measure that when we are going forward, borne by this data. We don't want to continue being proud of 5 million 60 kilogram bags of coffee. We should be proud of manufactured coffee from Uganda, penetrating